The Mirror Water Pact, by Driftwood Fables. Part 1. Whispers on the shore. There is a lake forgotten by maps, resting far beyond the well-walked roads and measured fields. A lake as still as sleep, its surface so perfectly calm it reflects the sky without a single ripple, no matter the wind. It is said that on certain nights, when the stars lean low and the mist drapes itself across the trees like old silk, the lake remembers. In the village of Eldhollow, nestled in a hollow bowl of hills and brambles, the lake was only spoken of in hushes and fragments. The children were told never to stray past the willow line. The elders spoke in knowing glances rather than warnings. And yet, every few generations, a child would wander too far. Sometimes they returned. Sometimes they didn't. Caelen was born in the hush between summer and autumn, under a waning moon and a rustle of rain. She was a quiet child, but not timid, curious, with a gaze that never wavered and a heart that felt older than her years. Her mother, Lyra, was a weaver, her fingers always busy with wool and reeds, crafting stories and threads. Her father had disappeared years ago, lost during a storm that came too quickly and ended too soon. Caelen had always felt drawn to the water. By the time she was 10, she knew every pebble and reed of the village creek. By 12, she had mapped the tributaries by memory. And by 14, she had begun waking from dreams soaked in silver, where voices beneath glass whispered her name like a lullaby. One morning, when the fog clung low and the dew trembled on every blade of grass, she walked to the edge of the forest and did not stop. The willow trees did not resist her. The bramble did not tug at her hem. She followed the soundless hum of something ancient, something waiting. When she saw the lake, her breath stilled. It was more mirror than water, so still that the sky looked doubled, so quiet that even the birds dared not sing. The surface shimmered as though lit from beneath, and on its farthest edge, she saw something impossible, a ripple moving outward, in reverse. Caelen stepped to the shore, her boots sinking slightly into the wet earth. The trees around the lake leaned toward it, as though trying to glimpse their own reflections. She crouched and touched the water with 2 fingers. It was cool, but not cold, soothing, as though it recognized her. She whispered, "What are you?" And the lake whispered back. Not in words, but in warmth that traveled up her arm and into her chest, into her breath, into her bones. She pulled her hand back, eyes wide. A wind stirred. Not above, but beneath. She saw it as a shimmer beneath the surface, spiraling from some unseen source deep in the center. Something ancient had awakened. That night, back in Eldhollow, she sat by the fire with her mother, threading silence between them like a spool of thread. Lyra's hands moved with practiced grace through her weaving, but her eyes flicked toward Caelen too often. "You went past the willow line," Lyra said softly. Caelen didn't lie. "I did." Lyra placed her weaving down, and her fingers trembled, not from anger, but from something else. Fear, perhaps. Or memory. "When I was your age," she said, "I dreamed of the lake too. But I never went." "Why not?" "Because someone had to stay behind." Her mother looked away. The water calls to those who are meant to carry something forward. Or leave something behind. Caelen tilted her head. "Leave what?" But Lyra only shook her head and stood, brushing invisible threads from her lap. "Sleep now. And stay away from the lake." But Caelen could not sleep. The warmth from the water still pulsed in her hand. The ripple still danced behind her eyes. And deep in her chest, a voice, soft and wordless, was calling her to return. Part 2. The Echo Beneath. The next morning, Caelen awoke with damp hair and bare feet. Her blankets were undisturbed, but her hands smelled faintly of lilies and rain. She looked down and found a single lake blossom tucked beneath her pillow, silver-veined and trembling gently, as if it still remembered the current. She didn't tell her mother. Instead, she tucked the blossom inside a locket her father had once given her, its clasp shaped like a spiral. She wore it beneath her tunic, close to her heart, and tried to go about her morning as though nothing had changed. But the world felt different, colors more vivid, silence more meaningful. The baker's bells chimed out of rhythm. The village fountain rippled though the wind was still. Even the crows perched atop the fence post seemed to watch her more intently than before, their heads tilted as if they, too, had heard the lake's whisper. At twilight, she returned to the edge of the forest. The willow trees swayed like guardians, and as she passed them again, they did not resist her. In fact, they parted more easily this time, as though recognizing her now as one of their own. She followed the scent of moss and moonlight until she reached the lakeside again. The surface was just as she remembered, polished, perfect, otherworldly. But this time, something floated at the center. A single lantern, unlit, yet glowing from within with a soft internal light. It drifted on the water's skin, unmoving and untouched by wind. When she stepped closer, the light flickered gently, responding to her presence. Then came the voice. Not from the sky. Not from the earth. From the water itself. You are the one. The sound was inside her, deep, soft, resonant. Not a command, but an invitation. The water rippled outward, forming concentric circles that pulsed with light. As Caelen stepped forward, the water remained shallow, rising only to her ankles though she walked further in. It was not a lake anymore. It was a path. With each step, her heartbeat slowed. Her thoughts grew softer. The chill that might have once bitten her skin now felt like a welcome breeze on a summer night. The lantern floated toward her, stopping just inches from her chest. She reached out, and the moment her fingers brushed its surface, the world around her shifted. She was no longer standing in water. She was falling, slowly, gently, like a leaf in twilight, through a tunnel of mirrored light. Around her swirled images, cities made of coral and crystal, towers submerged in rippling glass, forests breathing beneath the lakebed. She landed with a breathless stillness onto a smooth stone floor. Before her stood a woman. Tall. Cloaked in robes that shimmered like dawn breaking through fog. Her hair floated as though underwater, though the air here felt dry and warm. Her eyes were not unkind, but they held centuries. You've come, she said. Caelen opened her mouth, but no words came. The woman smiled. There is no need to speak. The pact recognizes you. The pact. Caelen finally managed. The woman turned, gesturing toward a long hall lined with silver trees. Hanging from every branch were more lanterns, each glowing faintly with a different hue. Gold, blue, green, lavender. This is the kingdom beneath, she said. A place that was sealed when the world above forgot us. But you have remembered. Part 3. The Lantern Hall. Caelen stood in silent awe, her eyes scanning the endless corridor of silver-barked trees. Their branches shimmered with dewless moisture, though no droplets fell, and each lantern seemed to hum with a faint inner music, a tune just at the edge of perception, like a lullaby remembered from early childhood. The woman guided her forward, her footsteps silent on the smooth stone beneath. Each lantern holds a memory, she explained, her voice like still water. Not a memory of one person, but of an entire moment. Whole seasons, whole feelings, whole truths, caught and kept, so they would not vanish from the world. Caelen paused beneath a lantern that pulsed pale violet. She could feel it calling gently, not in words, but in an ache of longing. The woman gave a slight nod, as if understanding her curiosity without needing a question spoken aloud. She reached toward the lantern. The moment her fingertips brushed its glass, a wave of sensation passed through her chest. She did not see a vision, she became one. A child running barefoot through knee-high flowers. A firelit gathering beside a great lake. An old song sung by voices layered in harmony, rising like mist into stars. She gasped, stepping back as the memory faded. The woman caught her arm, steadying her. They are deep, she said softly. But you are not drowning. Only remembering. What is this place? Caelen whispered. Is it a dream? The woman turned her gaze to the arched ceiling above, which rippled like the lake's surface. This is what remains, she said, of a kingdom that once kept balance between water and sky. Between memory and forgetting. We are not dream. We are not myth. We are beneath. They moved deeper into the hall. The lanterns grew brighter, and the trees more intricate. Caelen noticed their roots wound together like braided hair, and from their trunks etched symbols glowed faintly, glyphs older than anything she had seen in books or stone. The woman stopped before a pedestal at the center of a wide chamber. Upon it sat a vessel of mirrored crystal, its surface swirling with unreadable patterns. Caelen approached it slowly, compelled by the silent weight of it. This is the heart well, said the woman. It holds the pact. Caelen looked up. What is the pact? The woman's gaze softened, as though she was seeing someone long missed. Long ago, when the world above was still young, we, the people beneath, offered memory to the surface in exchange for forgetting our sorrow. We gave beauty and peace. And in return, the world agreed to hold space for us. To remember us gently. Caelen's brow furrowed. But, they forgot, didn't they? The woman nodded. Over time, the pact was neglected. Names faded. Paths to the lake were sealed. And those who once knew the way began to treat it as legend. Her fingers touched the mirrored surface. Until one heart remembered. Until you. Caelen's hand moved to the locket at her chest, feeling its quiet warmth. I didn't mean to find this place. No one ever means to, the woman said. But only those called by memory can. There was silence then. Not emptiness, but fullness, a hush filled with meaning. Why me? Caelen asked at last. The woman tilted her head. Because you carry both memory and longing. And because the pact is breaking. Part 4. The fracture. The pact is breaking, the woman repeated gently, her voice like water falling over polished stone. Each year the surface forgets a little more. The stories grow dimmer. The sacred waters dry at the edges. Soon, even this place will begin to unravel. Caelen's breath caught. Can it be fixed? The woman turned her gaze to the mirrored ceiling again. This time, it was not still. The surface above rippled faintly, cracks of light spiderwebbing across it like fractures in a frozen pond. It can be renewed, she said. But only with a new bond, a new voice. The lanterns in the trees flickered in response to her words, as though listening. A few even lowered themselves slightly, closer to Caelen, glowing with hues she could not name, colors that felt like the edges of dreams or memories nearly recalled. Caelen took a step back. You want me to, what? Stay here? No, the woman said softly. You must go back. Back? She echoed. But I just got here. The woman stepped forward, gently brushing her fingers along Caelen's locket. The pact is not forged beneath. It is forged above. You carry the key, child. What you do with it beyond the water's edge will determine what becomes of us. The lanterns behind her dimmed slightly, casting longer shadows along the hall. I don't understand, Caelen said, frustration creeping into her voice like wind under a door. How can I fix something I barely know? The woman smiled, not unkindly, but with that same sense of ancient patience that ran like a river through everything here. You don't need to know. You need only remember. And listen. The rest will come. She turned then, robes rustling like leaves against silk, and beckoned Caelen to follow. They moved beyond the lantern hall and into a small alcove where a pool lay still and clear as a glass plate. Around its edge grew small ferns and reeds made of light. This is the memory pool, the woman said. One step into its waters will return you to the surface. But when you return, you will carry more than memory. You will carry possibility. Caelen looked down into the pool and gasped. Reflected there was not her own face, but dozens of others. Children with lanterns. Elders with sorrowful smiles. Faces she didn't recognize, and yet, somehow, they felt familiar, like old dreams or stories once told to her in the cradle of night. She knelt, brushing her fingers across the surface, and the pool responded with warmth. But what do I do? She whispered. How do I keep people from forgetting? The woman's voice came soft and sure. You share. Caelen looked back. Tell the stories, she said. Even if no one believes. Even if they laugh. Speak of the lake. Speak of the light. Speak of what was once, and what may be again. Caelen stood slowly, the weight of something larger than her own life settling on her shoulders, but not heavily. More like a mantle, carefully placed. She stepped into the water. There was no cold. No rush. Just light, and a lifting sensation, as though her very heartbeat was being carried upward on a tide made of memory. And then, stillness. She awoke at the edge of the lake, beneath a lavender sky. Part 5. The first story. Caelen sat up slowly, the reeds brushing against her arms like the breath of a dream. Morning light filtered through the willow trees in golden shafts, casting ripples of warmth over the mirrored lake. There was no sign of the lantern. No sign of the woman. And yet, the weight of what had passed remained within her. Her locket pulsed faintly against her chest, no longer simply warm but softly glowing. She held it in her palm and watched as the silver blossom within shimmered, alive, somehow, with memory. Rising to her feet, she took one last look at the lake. It was still again, surface unmoved. But now she saw it for what it was, not merely water, but a threshold. The journey home was quiet. The wind stirred through the trees in a new rhythm, as if the branches whispered a song only she could hear. Birds flew overhead in lazy spirals, and even the ground beneath her feet felt softer. Eld Hollow had not changed, but Caelen had. When she returned, her mother looked up from her weaving and paused mid-thread. She said nothing for a long time, only watching her daughter with eyes that brimmed with understanding. Then, softly, she said, "You've seen it." Caelen nodded. And Lyra, without another word, stood and embraced her. That night, Caelen did not sleep. Instead, she took her father's old journal from the wooden chest at the end of her bed and opened it to the first blank page. She dipped her pen in ink and wrote 3 words. The Mirror Water Pact. Each night after, she wrote a little more. Of the woman beneath the lake. Of the lantern hall and the glowing trees. Of the pact once made and the silence that followed. She began to speak of it in the market, casually at first, turning story into tale, tale into legend. Some listened with amusement. Others with distant curiosity. A few scoffed. But more than she expected, stayed. They began asking questions. Had she seen the lake? Was it true the water never rippled? Did the lanterns really hold memories? She answered gently. Not as one trying to convince, but as one offering a gift. Soon, children began walking to the willow edge and placing small tokens near the shore, stones carved with symbols, feathers dipped in dye, tiny bells made of copper. The lake began to stir in quiet ways. A fish glimpsed beneath glass, though no one saw it leap. A ripple that traveled inward, not out. A lantern, just once, seen at dawn hovering briefly before vanishing. And Caelen kept writing. The journal filled. Then another. And another. Elders began telling stories they had not spoken of in years. Dreams came to the old and young alike, dreams of trees with silver bark and halls made of memory. Caelen knew then, the pact was mending. But there was still more to do. One evening, she climbed the hill above the village and planted a single lantern in the soft earth. It had no flame. Only a glimmer, soft as a promise. She whispered to it, "Let someone else remember next." Part 6. The Keeper of Small Truths. In the months that followed, Caelen became known quietly, not as a hero, not as a sage, but as something simpler and, perhaps, far more important, a keeper of small truths. Children came to her doorstep after sunset with wide eyes and folded paper stars. They would ask, "Can you tell us about the light trees? Or is it true there's a city under the water?" Caelen always smiled, set aside her pen, and invited them to sit near the hearth. She never raised her voice, never exaggerated. She spoke with the calm certainty of someone who had been. And the lantern above her door always glowed a little brighter when she spoke, as if echoing her words. Some villagers grew wary. They muttered about old magic, about stories best left alone. But even they found themselves lingering near her window when she spoke, ears straining in the twilight. And so the remembering spread. But not all remembering is welcomed. One winter morning, when frost clung stubbornly to every leaf, a traveler arrived in Eld Hollow. He wore robes stitched with ocean thread and carried a satchel carved with tide runes. His eyes were sharp, not unkind, but filled with knowing. He found Caelen at the well, drawing water. "You've awakened something," he said, without greeting. Caelen looked up, unstartled. "I remembered." He nodded. "The lake has stirred. So has the balance." She set her bucket down. "Are you here to stop it?" The man shook his head slowly. "No. Only to see whether you understand what comes next." Caelen didn't answer immediately. She looked to the horizon where the lake slept beneath layers of snow and silence. "There are others," she said at last. "Others who've forgotten. And others who remember in pieces. I'm only the first voice. Not the last." The traveler studied her for a long time. "You carry it well," he said finally. "But know this, when the pact mends fully, the two worlds may overlap again. And when they do, there will be echoes, not all of them gentle." She met his eyes. "Then we'll meet them with light." The man gave a small bow. "You are what the lake hoped for." And he left. That night, Caelen dreamed of the lantern hall, but it was no longer still. People moved between the trees. Some were reading. Some were listening. The lanterns pulsed in rhythm with laughter and song. And at the center stood the woman, her robes now brighter than before. She smiled at Caelen across the dream. "You are no longer a visitor," she said. "You are a bridge." When Caelen awoke, there was a feather resting on her windowsill, made entirely of mirrored glass. She tucked it into her journal and began writing again. Not from memory this time, but from what was still to come. The lake would call others. In time, new voices would echo its depths. She would greet each one as the woman had once greeted her. Not with questions, but with a lantern. Part 7. Seeds of Light. Spring arrived in Eld Hollow like a hush before a song. The frost receded from the hilltops, and the trees leaned eagerly into the sun's slow return. Caelen walked more often to the edge of the forest now, sometimes alone, sometimes with others. She never crossed the willow line without intent. Instead, she taught others how to listen, to the rustle of the trees, the hush of the wind, the pulse that lived beneath the lake's stillness. She spoke of the pact not as a legend but as a living promise, something planted long ago that had begun to bloom again. Lanterns began to appear in unexpected places. A small one hung from the bakery's eaves, left there by the owner's daughter after a vivid dream. Another swung gently beneath the eaves of the schoolhouse, tied with silver thread. And still another appeared on the village bridge, no one knowing who placed it, but none daring to remove it. Caelen's mother watched all this with a quiet pride. Lyra's weavings changed, too. Threads of silver now danced through her wool, and the patterns became less of the earth and more of the in-between, spirals like ripples, trees whose roots held stars. One evening, as Caelen helped her wind yarn, Lyra spoke without looking up. "When I was a girl, I dreamed of a woman made of light." Caelen paused. Did she speak? "She placed her hand over my heart," Lyra said. "And when I woke, I knew it would be someone else who walked the path. Someone from me, but beyond me." Caelen smiled and squeezed her hand. "I'm glad it was you," her mother added. But the lake was not content with remembrance alone. It began to send signs, small and strange at first. A fox with fur like rainlight watching from the forest edge. Fish swimming beneath frozen water, glowing as though lantern lit. A song heard only at twilight, echoing faintly from the hills. Caelen knew what it meant. The boundaries between above and beneath were softening. One morning, she walked to the lake and found a child waiting there. He was no older than 7, barefoot, and holding a reed flute. He looked up at her and said, "I followed the song." Caelen sat beside him and asked, "What did it sound like?" He played a single note, soft and clear, and the lake rippled in response. She closed her eyes. The lanterns were calling again. The kingdom beneath was not just waiting for memory. It was preparing to return. But not in conquest, and not in silence. It would return as stories do, slowly, piece by piece, through those who dared to believe in the invisible, the forgotten, the nearly lost. That night, Caelen lit the lantern above her door. It glowed steadily, not too bright, not too faint. And in its light, 100 tiny motes danced, seeds of something ancient, waiting to grow. In the distance, beneath the lake, the lantern hole pulsed like a heartbeat. Alive. Waiting. Part 8. When the waters remember. The lantern above Caelen's door remained lit, not just through the spring but into the golden dusk of summer, flickering gently as if breathing in rhythm with the world. Eld Hollow had changed in small ways, ways that only those paying attention would notice. There were more silences now, and they were comforting rather than awkward. More people walked to the lake and sat without speaking, just to listen. The children played games about underwater halls and silver trees. The stories had taken root. And one morning, the lake bloomed. From its mirrored surface rose lilies none had planted, pale silver, veined with threads of moonlight. They opened as the dawn arrived and closed again each dusk, as though sleeping. The villagers came to see, not in fear but reverence. No one touched them. Caelen returned to the willow edge often but never crossed it again. She didn't need to. She could feel the lanterns from here now. Hear their songs in the hush of reeds, in the low echo of dusk wind. And then one day, it happened. A girl of no more than 5 approached Caelen while she sat journaling beneath the hilltop oak. She had dark curls and dirt-smudged hands, and she held a shard of glass in one palm. "It talks," she said, eyes wide. "It sings sometimes." Caelen took the shard gently. It shimmered, just slightly, in her hand. A sliver of mirrored water made solid. The pact was no longer just healing. It was blooming. Spreading from lake to hill to hearth to heart. That night, Caelen wrote one final passage in her journal. They remembered. Not because I made them. But because the memory had waited long enough to return on its own. The lake breathes again. The light is passed on. I was only the echo. They are the song. She closed the book and placed it on the highest shelf, alongside her father's old journal and her mother's tapestries folded with care. Then she stepped outside into the night. The stars reflected in the lake like tiny lanterns. The air was warm. Crickets sang. And from somewhere deep beneath the mirrored surface, a soft, steady hum began, a sound felt more than heard. A promise, renewed. A light, remembered. A kingdom, no longer forgotten. As she turned to return home, Caelen smiled to herself. The story was no longer hers alone. It belonged to the world again. And the world, slowly, softly, sweetly, was listening.